Refreshments are on me!
Lipton iced tea.
Here you go, guys. Cheers.
Cheers. Nothing refreshes better than the good taste of Lipton iced tea. Magic. Guess it must be the quality teas they put in these flow-through bags.
That's jolly good. I guess we all like the taste of Lipton. Of course, why do you think they call us the Tea-Men?
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, everybody, pull up a chair and pour yourself a big, tall glass of iced tea. It's time for Good Seats Still Available, our curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. Yeah, it's our weekly little excursion into the forgotten realms of pro sports, especially here in the United States, North America. We appreciate your finding us. My name is Tim Hanlon. Welcome to the proceedings. And yes, it's time to talk about the New England Tea-Men, probably one of the greatest named franchises in certainly NASL, North American Soccer League history, and maybe even in the realm of defunct sports altogether in the United States. And I will fight you on perhaps it being one of the best ever logos to ever grace uniforms in the United States and North America. And if you are a soccer fan of any significant age, you will certainly remember, perhaps quite fondly, this team known as the New England Tea-Men, obviously playing in the northeastern region of the United States, Boston a little bit, but certainly regionally in Foxborough. And we get into the interesting story of this team of the North American Soccer League. 3 years it ran until it moved to Jacksonville in 1980, and under interesting circumstances. And we're not quite sure exactly, did they start in Jacksonville playing indoors before they played actually their first outdoor season and match? We're not quite sure. But our guest this week, Steve Gans, helps us try to get to the bottom of all of it. Steve Gans, a name you may know if you're a soccer fan or practitioner, a name you may be familiar with. In 2018, Steve was one of the handful of candidates running for the presidency of U.S. Soccer, the United States Soccer Federation, as it was previously known as. Pretty much, it's more commonly known as U.S. Soccer. And a very tense and intriguing presidential campaign that was for the future of the sport in the United States, and arguably very much still an open-ended debate and conversation. Steve is known more for his work as a corporate lawyer, well-regarded and highly sought after in various aspects of soccer law, contracts, player types of stuff. And as we get into our conversation in a few moments, a player back in the day in the collegiate ranks and a little bit in the pro game. We'll get into sort of that story. But interestingly, our little hook into our conversation with Steve was his earliest days. I think you could call it his first sort of professional taste of this game known as pro soccer in the United States, was as a high school kid working in the public relations department and the marketing team for this team known as the New England Tea-Men. Why were they called the Tea-Men? Well, we'll get into that. But if you didn't remember, they were owned by the Lipton Tea Company, now part of Unilever, and just, a mere brand of that sort of gigantic conglomerate. But back in the day, Lipton Tea, based in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, of all places, a hop, skip, and a jump from where yours truly grew up, a little town called Hohokus, but I digress, was, a company that was interested in this pixie dust known as the North American Soccer League. Warner Communications, certainly with the New York Cosmos, Gulf and Western, with the Washington Diplomats. There were other companies that kind of just sort of jumped onto the old proverbial bandwagon. But who knows what the marketing geniuses and the minds in the hallways at corporate headquarters of Lipton Tea were thinking when they thought, hey, let's buy a North American Soccer League franchise and we'll make millions. I'm not quite sure it wound up that way, but in one effort of corporate synergy, you heard that little clip there. That was an ad from 1979, we think. And it was majority voiced over by Kevin Cat Keelan. Yes, the standout goalie for the New England T-Men. And his mates enjoying a nice big pitcher right after a game of Lipton iced tea. And of course, why not? Let's make that corporate synergy work. And I will tell you that this is a team that probably punched above its weight in terms of memories, its logo, its jerseys. If you may remember, at least for the first couple of seasons, they literally had a T, the shape of a letter T, on their jerseys, sort of yellow and red/burnt orange. It was gorgeous, sort of looking logo that incorporated all those colors, light blue and white, as well. Sort of the big schooner ship, and of course the Boston Tea Party. That's sort of the background of sort of why the name of the team. But they stood out, and they really hit the NASL in 1978, one of 6 expansion franchises that year, to bring it up to 24 teams back then. And as we get into our conversation with Steve, a really good sense of perhaps just a few too many teams at that. But boy, did they make a splash their first season. They beat the Cosmos twice. You had Mike Flanagan lighten it up, and I believe was the most valuable player of the NASL that year. Mike Flanagan was. He only lasted one season with the team. He wound up going back to England. He had led Charlton Athletic as a player. He was basically with the T-Men on loan for 1970, and then went back to play for Crystal Palace and Queen's Park Rangers, back to Charlton, and a few other things, and also some management of teams relatively recently too. But Cat Keelan was part of this team for sure. Let's see, we had Ringo Cantillo, somebody we talked about who played with the Cincinnati Comets prior in the ASL. He was a major presence in the American Soccer League. But Ringo Cantillo had a spell with the T-Men. Laurie Abrahams, a whole bunch of great players. Brian Alderson, who you New Jersey Rockets MISL fans. Okay, well, there are many of them. But he was a player for that team later on. He was part of the mix. And on and on and on. Some great names and faces that dominated this team for 3 years. And peripatetic, frankly, within the New England region. We get into that with Steve. This is a team that came after a similarly wayward team known as the Boston Minutemen. That was actually perhaps more the early adjunct for Steve into his what effectively became his pro soccer experiences. The Boston Minutemen played at, let's see, it was probably 5 or 6 different stadiums in the Boston and largely wider New England area. Alumni Stadium at Boston College, Nickerson Field at Boston University, Foxborough Stadium, Veterans Stadium in Quincy, et cetera, et cetera. The T-Men had their own sort of issues playing, at least in the beginning, at Schaefer Stadium, which was brand new or relatively new back then in Foxborough, Massachusetts, essentially losing the opportunity to play and having to go back to Nickerson Field again, and then going back to Schaefer Stadium once again. So it's indicative of not only sort of the T-Men's sort of travails, but also pro soccer's sort of waywardness, I guess, in the Boston and New England metropolitan area. Frankly, an issue that still lasts and is pretty raw today to New England Revolution fans of Major League Soccer. This sort of continued quest to finally, hopefully someday, maybe find a more Boston-centric or within the city limits of Boston, soccer-specific stadium. As long as, I guess, the Kraft family owns the the Revolution, I think it's going to be very hard to sort of separate them from Gillette Stadium, where it's very cost efficient to house that team in the home of the New England Patriots for sure. But it does speak to the regionality of soccer in the pro ranks in the Boston metropolitan area, and frankly, just the difficulty of trying to find and create a soccer-specific venue for a team in the New England region. And the New England Teamen are our excuse to kind of get into that and a whole bunch of other stuff. We make lots of different stops. Yes, with the Minutemen, the Cosmos certainly make an appearance. We talk about their move and the debatable dates of when that sort of occurred from New England to Jacksonville, where they became the Jacksonville Teamen, right up there in the what are you talking about with things like the Utah Jazz going from New Orleans, keeping the name, but all that stuff. And we also sort of get into a little bit of is a Teamen one word or Teamen two words? Hint, it's absolutely the latter, as our sleuthing has discovered. All that and much, much more. Steve Gans, our guest this week, as we talk about the New England Teamen and a little bit of all those other things as well. A fun episode, which you will enjoy immensely, as I did in recording it a few weeks back. First, a little promotional announcement from our sponsor this week at sportshistorycollectibles.com. Our pal, Dean Mitchell, in San Diego. Check him out at sportshistorycollectibles.com. And it is basically the place to find all kinds of great memorabilia, publications, yearbooks and pennants and buttons and stickers and all kinds of stuff around various teams and leagues in the realm of pro sports, collegiately too, that for whatever reasons are now firmly ensconced in the where are they now department. And yes, a couple of great New England Teamen memories. There's a wonderful issue of Soccer Corner magazine from August of 1978, attractively priced, almost mint condition. There's a great article in there about New England's Teamen, and some great pictures in there, and some strategies as to how they were going to sort of tackle, if you will, the market, how they're going to structure the team. A great full-page picture in all its black and white glory of Mike Flanagan, the standout breakout star of that team in 1978 and the most valuable player he was. Just one of the many, many, many items that you will find across all kinds of teams and leagues. And yeah, there's been a sort of a redo of the site. Is some great linkages to other products that you might be interested in based on your search. Your searches is a great way, as a great visuals to sort of navigate the site. It's just fantastic stuff. And it's all there for you at sportshistorycollectibles.com. There are just treasures galore there. I'm looking at the Soccer Corner magazine for the New England Teamen article, and I see some related products that I've never seen before. Like, for example, the Vancouver Whitecaps fight song, 45 RPM record in a beautiful sleeve. Who knew there was a Whitecaps fight song? I did not. But all kinds of great stuff. You will lose a ton of time, and you will probably part with more than a few bucks at sportshistorycollectibles.com. And by the way, when you get ready to pony up some PayPal or some Venmo goodness or a credit card or whatever you're going to use to pay, I don't think he takes crypto just yet, Dean. But who knows? Maybe that's part of the next refresh of the site. sportshistorycollectibles.com. Make sure you use the promo code GOODSEATS, and that will entitle you to 15% off all of your purchases. That's once again, it's sportshistorycollectibles.com. You will not regret having visited it, and make sure you bookmark it because Dean's adding new stuff just about each and every week. Thank you to Dean and Sports History Collectibles for their sponsorship of this here little show. And thank you for continuing to listen to this week's fine and wonderful discussion / conversation with Steve Gans, counselor at large, as we talk about not the law as much, not legalities as much, but some of the early days of his soccer fandom and translation into his first taste of professional soccer in the United States. The New England Teamen, the center of that conversation. Here it is. Please enjoy. I'm really interested to hear your origin story because
Sure.
I saw, I obviously have seen you in U.S. soccer circles. I think for our audience to understand, you were you threw your hat in the ring for the most recent U.S. soccer presidency.
Yes.
So
I did.
yeah, so you're active in the sport, but I guess I want to dial it all the way back because I didn't put the pieces together until I saw just a tweet a couple of weeks ago. Soccer America's 50th anniversary, and here you are reminiscing about writing about this team called the New England T-Men. I guess it was a high school exploit of yours. So I had to reach out and say, hey, do you have any memories? And do you want to reminisce about that team in particular, and maybe sort of your hook into soccer?
Yeah, I'm happy to reminisce about the T-Men. Yeah, a lot of stories around that time personally, and seminal experience in my life for sure.
Well, I mean,
so I'm happy to go anywhere. I'm happy to go anywhere you want to go.
Yeah, well, so were you a player as a kid? I'm assuming you're growing up in the Boston metro area. Were you? Did you understand this Minutemen team that came before? What was your entree to all of this?
So my entree to the sport was my father, who escaped the Holocaust and came over from Germany, and brought this sport that everybody laughed at. Over here, everybody in his circle. He brought it over with a passion. And when he first came here, he used to, or first settled in Boston, he used to take a train to New York just to go to like Randall's Island and see semi-pro games because there really, there wasn't pro soccer or anything like that. And he loved the sport. And so he always exposed me to it. But notwithstanding that, he would take me to semi-pro games all the time and around town, and and I liked it. But I grew up a baseball player because this was a time in the '60s and '70s when the Red Sox, were, as they still are, prominent. The Bruins owned the town. It was the Bobby Orr era, and we had the Celtics and also the Patriots. Though the Patriots weren't as popular, but the Celtics and Red Sox, have amazing, tradition in a consistent way in the city, but also the halcyon days for the Bruins were then because everyone fell in love with Bobby Orr. And so, I played baseball mostly. I played all sports, but baseball is a sport I pursued and really didn't play much soccer because there wasn't that much organized soccer. But my dad would take me to the semi-pro games. He would also take me to, ballrooms at hotels where the only way you could see international matches were wherein hotels would show them on closed circuit TV. And so I remember when I was a young kid seeing the 1970 World Cup final between Brazil and Italy, which was an amazing thing to see Pelé and a lot of passionate ethnic people who lived in the area, gesticulate and shout, and inevitably there would be some sort of blackout within the game, and they'd shout even more until it was fixed. So I had those memories, and they were imprinted on me, but none of that really caused me to convert and give up baseball until, interestingly, you say the Minutemen. When an NASL team came to town for the first time in 1974, the Boston Minutemen. And after I went to the first game in person, so it was the best game maybe I had seen in person, or at least pro game I'd seen in person, though I had seen Pelé in an exhibition game at Fenway Park. But that was, friendly. And when I saw the Minutemen that first year and saw what was relatively high-level soccer to that point, I was bitten myself, and I just gave up baseball and said I'm gonna really devote my playing focus to soccer, and that was a decision I made. The other thing that was fortuitous was the coach of the Minutemen was a guy who lived in my town named Hubert Vogelsinger, who you probably heard of.
Oh, sure. Went to his soccer camp a couple of years myself.
Oh, there you go. So, yes, and so did I.
He got up really early. I couldn't get over that.
Yeah, you would have to run barefoot 2 miles. Nothing you could do because of liability reasons anymore. Yeah, did you go to the one in Connecticut? We probably went together.
I think I did. Yeah, one in Connecticut and one maybe in New York State somewhere too.
Yeah, at the Taft School. That's where we went. So Hubie was the coach of the Minutemen. He come from Yale. He was renowned because he had, along with his wife, written this book called The Challenge of Soccer. It was the first instructional book of any note. And I was lucky that we met each other, and he became my kind of soccer playing mentor, where he took an interest in me, and I started. I played a little in my backyard or whatever, but starting at 13 is pretty late, and I was lucky he took interest in me and nurtured me as a player. That's anywhere a late time to start, but however high level I reached, or however proficient a player I became, is largely because of Hubert Vogelsinger. And so from there I was, all in. And so certainly I knew about the Minutemen. And
well, before we go off the Minutemen, tell me about sort of that, right? So you say, here's a question that you can unpack, right? Which stadium did you go to for your first game? That's a loaded question.
Yeah. So you know about that. That's a big deal. It was a Boston College alumni stadium, right? And the Minutemen did extremely well that first year. For those days in the NASL, that was prior to Pelé, and you had the example, the outlier of the Philadelphia Atoms doing very well, but generally most clubs not doing that well. And the Minutemen averaged about 10,000 fans a game at BC Alumni Stadium. But what happened was the citizenry that lived around that stadium, I will say also from my town, but not that my section of town, did not want any pro events there, and ultimately mobilized. And after that first highly successful year, the Minutemen were forced to move from BC Alumni Stadium and move to Boston University's Nickerson Field, wherein that kind of first-year magic, attendance-wide, it did not continue at the same level, other than, as you know, that was the year 1975 when Pelé was signed. And in that particular game against the Cosmos, to a fault, there was a high attendance, but they oversold the stadium capacity. And I'm sure you know this story, that there are so many fans in the stands that they spilled over to the sidelines. And after Pelé scored a goal, they broke lines and engulfed him, and the game had to be called off. Police had to call the whole game off and clear everyone from the field. So even the biggest crowd at a Minutemen game in 1975 at BU turned into fiasco. So I expect that's why you asked the question about the stadium.
Yeah, well, but also, too, I know in 76 even it got worse because there was sort of they became almost vagabond-like because they couldn't sort of and there were financial problems. So, but 75, though, I guess the peripatetic part was like where I was going with that. But I remember seeing some video. I think it was a game on a local PBS station. Kyle Roach Jr. is as an announcer, and that field looks like it really stretched the boundaries of what the soccer field would be. I mean, literally, it was all green, looked like very, very hard turf, and I don't know, it just didn't look comfortable, shall we say, as a soccer field.
Yeah, it's funny. My kids have trained there at BU, and there've been a lot of soccer teams there. I'm not saying it can't be a successful venue, but for whatever reason, it hasn't been. And I have a friend who's an urban developer who our son was on my son's club team, and when we trained there a few times, he said it doesn't have the right aura, from the standpoint of the feng. I'm not pronouncing it right, but feng shui, I think.
Yeah.
Well, and so the teams never made it there. Although BU's park is actually Boston Braves, the former National League team, the prior to the Milwaukee Braves and Atlanta Braves. So it is a stadium with a lot of history, but it hasn't worked out for soccer. What happened in 76, and you really know your stuff, Tim, I am really impressed. Yes, they moved to Quincy Veterans Stadium, which was really a high school field. And that's because the owner ran into both financial and legal trouble in his personal life. And ultimately, and I'll never forget this, I was at a game and this guy started to sell off all the players because they still had a very good roster. Eusebio was there in '75, Antonio Samoas, Shep Messing, and I sat. I went to a game loyally in '76 in Quincy, Mass. At this, it was a good 5,000 to 10,000 seat stadium, but yet a high school stadium. And lo and behold, who sits down next to me is Shep Messing, because he's sitting out the game and he's going to be, sold to the Cosmos the next day. So I sat with Shep and his wife. So that was kind of interesting when I was 15. And, he got into major problems and, criminally. And at the end of '76, he sold off these guys, and the Minutemen they folded. Hubie went on to, I think, Team Hawaii. All the top players were gone, and I was brokenhearted. And so I actually wrote at age 15 to Phil Woosnam, the commissioner, and said, look, this just happened in Boston, or it's happening. Maybe I did it while it was still going on. It has nothing to do with Boston as a soccer town. It has to do with the mismanagement. Let me tell you what happened. This is a great soccer city, and you ought not to let this happen without league intervention. And so he sent one of his top guys in to meet with me. And, from that, it didn't save the Minutemen, but from that moment, I was, again, committed to making the sport work in the country and in my city. So that was the Minutemen, and it informed my relationship. And ultimately I transferred colleges to be with the team in. So that's the Minutemen.
Interesting. So, two things to unpack there. Number one, I mean, you mentioned some of these players, right? In particular, Eusebio, right, who arguably was one of the, or certainly on the downslope of being one of the generation's greatest players worldwide, right? And this is a guy who I think only more in retrospect sort of was remembered and further appreciated by the American fans. And Messing, Shep Messing, right, who we've been trying to get on this show. He sort of says he wants to be on it, and then he doesn't, and then he does, and he does. Someday we'll get him, hopefully, because I've got his biography that I've got all kinds of dog-eared notes on from. But yeah, I mean, these are two of some of the better players in the league at that time, and to see them both being part of the fire sale, I mean, that's a real indication that things are falling apart pretty quickly.
That's right. And the league didn't intervene early enough, and the owner really, I believe he went to prison because he had securities fraud and or Ponzi like charges against him ultimately. And that bespoke part of it, but maybe they could have found another owner that could have saved the team. But and so that when you see the sport fail and it doesn't fail, or franchise fail and it doesn't fail for any reason having to do with the city's interest in the sport or the sport itself, then you become more committed to it.
But it does lead to my other question, and this will be hopefully the somewhat nice and clean segue into the T-Men story, and for you too, is what I think still exists kind of today with today's MLS revolution, right? And that is Boston specifically and the Boston region generally, and its seeming inability to create, find, settle an actual decent soccer-friendly stadium, which, is obviously part of the MLS business model. But as we'll see with the T-Men in a minute, and the Minutemen clearly as well for a bunch of reasons, finding a place to play conveniently. We've talked about this with Andy Crossley about the WUSA and women's professional soccer and stuff with the Boston teams there too. It just seems like it's always been a challenge to kind of sort of circle around a venue that is friendly, well-located, fan appealing for the sport of soccer. It just seems like some of those issues that were sort of popping up with the Minutemen and later the T-Men just seemingly haven't really solved themselves yet for whatever reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it is true that there is not a readily accessible, ideal stadium currently. In other words, Fenway is a great venue, although there are field, as you can see with Liverpool's friendlies, there are field length issues. But friendly, obviously, Fenway would be a great venue. That's where Pelé played his exhibition, by the way. But that's not generally absent FSG owning a team going to be available. Foxborough has the location and size issues, except BC's not available generally because of the citizenry and the bar and other things. And B, we talked about it. You're right. The reason, though, for the fact that it's not a soccer-specific stadium is more complex, and we can get into it. Having nothing to do with fan interest in it, but more about, I think, the history of how these stadiums have been built in other cities' willingness to give massive tax breaks or otherwise to build them. If you look at MLS and most of the early ones, they were, the Colorado Rapids didn't do it in Denver. They did it in Commerce City. Chicago Fire didn't do it in Chicago. They did it in Bridgeview. And, those are cities that decided they needed to give subsidies. And, Massachusetts is a very self-possessed place, right, which, feels that it's leading in sports, but it's also leading in arts, education, finance, medicine, and those go into other dynamics about whether owners can exact subsidies from communities. So, but we can get into that if you want. That has nothing to do with really.
It's certainly an issue, right? And this by no means is that Pollyannish, right? Thinking that we're just get a stadium and everything will be fine. I mean, I've clearly, right? And look, you're talking to somebody who looks at MLS getting to, and we're almost now to 30 teams now, and I don't want to call it peak MLS, but I mean, we see what happened with the Super League, which I guess was going to be our wrap-up talk. But I mean, money and sports, right? I mean, it's frankly in that order, and I don't necessarily want to go back 40 years and just reminisce about the proverbial good old days because they were certainly not perfect. But make no mistake, big and business, capital letters, right? We can take pot shots at MLS. It's been around for 25 years. It's centrally controlled. It's not there's no pro rel and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is, there's a foundation there, right? But stadiums at any cost, right? I mean, ask the people at Bridgeview. I've been through that as a Chicago Fire fan, and I fell out of being a Chicago Fire fan. I mean, it was 45 miles each way for me in the northern suburbs of Chicago to go watch Fire games. But I did it for 3 years, and it wasn't the right location. There's lots of things, but Bridgeview lost a ton of money, and they're still paying that off, right? So, not at any cost, I guess.
Correct. To my point, and most of those communities lost a ton of money. And as I say again, and I kind of say proudly, this is a much more I shouldn't say much more, but this is a self-possessed community that is not going to, and you'll see even with Gillette Stadium, is not going to give owners massive financial support and tax breaks under threat of moving the team. And so where you see it differently is in those communities that absolutely wholly define themselves by their sports teams. This is a sports mad town. Reds at this point, Patriots as well. Patriots, Red Sox, Celtics, then Bruins. But on the other hand, this is a town that also defines itself by medicine and academics, education, colleges, and finance and arts. And so that's the difference. Gillette had to be built privately, and likely, absent again a desperate community, the soccer-specific stadium will have to be built that way here too. Now, there is a limitation here, which is to say, it's a built-up area, and finding the right space is not easy. Ideally, all things being equal, a soccer-specific stadium, grass field in a good location is ideal. But I still subscribe to the theory that a well-run team in a big stadium, in a grass field, is fine. It works. The Revolution in their first year did fine at Foxborough Stadium. The T-Men in 1968 drew 30,126 fans head to head against a Red Sox game. at a big stadium. Seattle, and they don't even have grass. So you see what the Seattle Sounders do now, and Atlanta United on turf. And so I don't think you absolutely need a soccer-specific stadium in order to make it successful here. This is a great town that loves soccer. It's just got to be run right, you know, and you know, the failures of the past are a referendum on, you know, particular situations, and also, you know, in some sense, the sweeping results of the league. But you know, I've always believed this is an amazing soccer town. To wit, you know, my involvement in the World Cup '94 bid effort, and how the community supported both that effort and the ultimate game. So anyway,
sure, well, yeah, I went to a few of those games too, including the Maradona game / debacle. But
oh yeah, you were at his final goal too. That's great.
But I digress. But this is also, so that part of it, right? So that stadium thing, it's also interestingly not unique to soccer in this story, right? Because the Boston then New England Patriots had their issues too, going from the AFL into the NFL, and frankly the origins of Schaefer Stadium, kit. Based and a relatively simple structure at that. I'm being charitable. It's also indicative of some of the stuff. I mean, it is the hub, right? But it's also recognizing that. But it's sort of a marriage of convenience too. Ultimately, but I'm sort of getting ahead. So 76, the team is basically gone, right? Dissolved. You're brokenhearted. You're in that impressionable period of time as an all-American sports fan and enthusiast and player and stuff, and you had a lot of vested interest in this team. Right. What happens after your dealings with the NASL senior executive or two, and what's the path to get to 1978 when all things sort of seem brand shiny and new again? Tell me about 77 and the intervening, like what's happening there, and how does this
you're talking about with me or soccer in Boston?
Both.
So, okay. So, you know, soccer in Boston, you know, there wasn't much to speak of. That was a dormant year. Obviously, it was a huge year, you know, for soccer in this country because of Pelé's critical mass impact and, you know, 77,691 fans at the Meadowlands for a big game against Fort Lauderdale, and the Cosmos averaging, you know, well over 40,000 fans a game. And, you know, that year. And so, you know, I made a lot, you came to games in Boston. I made a lot of trips to the Meadowlands that year. But there's no team to speak of. In terms of me personally, I guess two things of note. I mean, I continue to hopefully develop as a player and you know, in school and under Hubie's, you know, periodic guidance, because, you know, he was still instructing me from afar when he went to Hawaii. And but personally, I guess two things. One was I had in I think 76, I had been chosen by a company that was called Bacanta, that you wouldn't know, but it was the United States representative for Puma, which in those days, after Adidas, or Adidas and Puma were the two big brands. Nike wasn't the biggest brand yet, certainly not in soccer. And I got chosen by Bacanta to be kind of their national youth representative for Puma, which meant basically that they would fly me to their offices in Elmsford, New York, in a like a propeller plane that made me sick and scared every time, but to advise them, you know, about soccer and about other sports too, but which athletes they should sign, and in particular about soccer, which but even, you know, as to someone like Walt Frazier or Reggie Jackson, who are their athletes, you know, they wanted to get the young person's input. So that, you know, that kept me involved a lot. And the other thing is, I wrote to Soccer America. Now, when would that have been? It would have been in 77, I believe, when Canalia was signed. And what happened, and I don't think Lynn Burling or Paul Kennedy object to me saying this, but basically what happened was, you know, they're based on the West Coast, and Canalia was signed, I believe, in 77. Tell me if I'm wrong. But in his first game,
I think he came in middle of 76 when they were still in Yankee Stadium. that year?
Oh, okay. So it was 76. So maybe I didn't start writing for them until 77, but I can't tell you. But so when he came, and I don't doubt you're right because you know your stuff. When he came in 76, though, it was quickly, and they won their first game 6-0. And Soccer America reported the box score as 6-0, and two of the goals, there were 4 goals scored by a variety of players, and 2 of the goals were scored by, they reported it as Kuykendall, and they had a player named Kurt Kuykendall as a backup goalkeeper.
Yeah.
And I wrote them and said, hey, you've obviously got no presence at Cosmos games, and you took it off the roster. It was Giorgio Canalia, and Lynn Burling wrote me back and said, yes, Steve, we're trying to improve our East Coast presence. Thanks for pointing it out. How would you like to submit an article? And frankly, since I was still a high school player, I do not believe I did it in 76. It probably was 77, but I submitted an art. I covered the Division I high school. My team didn't make it. Division I high school soccer championship, Eastern Mass championship, and wrote an article on it and submitted it. And lo and behold, they wrote it. So that, and I really truly believe, although I can't, those articles you saw, I don't even, that on the T-Men one, I didn't remember until they sent them to put them on Twitter. Soccer America did. But so that was 77 for me. I still playing and developing the Puma thing, and then becoming a writer, I say in quotes, for Soccer America. And then of course the big bridge to 78 when the NASL expanded, was so excited about its success, expanded probably too quickly, but expanded by 33% from 18 to 24 teams in one fell swoop, with the Portland Timbers being owned by Weyerhaeuser, and the T-Men being owned by Lipton Tea. But we had a team back in Boston, which was thrilling. Right.
How did you find out about this T-Men thing? Because it if I remember correctly, it was pretty hastily assembled, or from announcement to first game. Did you find out about it just through the grapevine, or were you part of the mix at all, or was it because of your quote unquote Soccer America press credentials and all that it got you into and all that stuff? How did it hit your radar, and what was the buzz around it, and were people weary or excited relative to that of the Minutemen prior?
I think first of all, I'd say people were excited because this idea that corporations would be involved, that they would back it, and they wouldn't have the risk of this solo investor who had been a sole investor, who had been the Minutemen president, who turned out to be a crook. So there would be, and that's not too strong a word, because I believe he went to federal prison. And so the reality is that there was excitement. I cannot honestly, I maintain my connection to the NASL front office because of Woosnam was still the commissioner, and the senior executive who he sent in to meet with me, was still in contact with me. Whether I cannot honestly remember at all whether I got early word of it, either from that or, so-called journalism, my journalistic credentials. But I will tell you that whenever I found out about it, I was very enthused, and either made contact with or was contacted by, the T-Men pretty quickly. In this case, by their PR director, a guy named Vince Casey, a guy who I very much admired, who contacted me and brought me. I was 17, but brought me in on a part-time basis to do some exciting stuff. And so how it all happened, I can't fully remember, but I certainly was excited and jumped on it and was involved pretty quickly.
What did you learn once you sort of got into the mix there about the organization, the stadium setup, their approach to talent, all that kind of stuff? Did this seem a little bit more professional, so to speak, given the last year of the Minutemen that you knew about? Lord knows the logo was fantastic.
Yeah, it absolutely did. It absolutely did. Seem extremely exciting because of the backing behind it, the professionalism, the players they were going to bring in. Because, as you know, there's nothing I can tell you that you don't know. Those were the days where the English league was shorter, and you could bring players in on loan, of huge name or huge club, and so the types of players, as you remember, Kevin Cat Keelan from Norwich, when Norwich was a much more prominent team than now, not on the edge of the first division, and players like that was extremely exciting. They also gathered up top American players or players from the Americas like Ringo Cantillo, who became actually a very close friend to me, and I think we actually kind of both mentored each other. He mentored me as a player, and
he was a star in the ASL, right? This was a step up for him, I guess, in terms of pro, right?
Yeah, he was a star in the ASL, but he also, I did believe he came from a short stint with the NASL, but he was on the Costa Rican, I think, national team. No, actually, at least the youth national teams. But just a great person and a great player. So again, the initial impressions were unbelievable, in terms of finances and commitment. Truth is, though, early on, you could see that there were some chinks in the armor that, having a club largely run from Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, would have some opportunity cost to it in terms of attenuation, and of course not really understanding how soccer works. So, I remember
for our audience, Englewood Cliffs was the home of Lipton Tea, I guess. Then later subsumed into, I guess, Unilever and other things and stuff. But yeah, so you're saying the team was literally managed corporately there, and not locally in the Boston area, huh?
No, I'm not literally saying that. There was a general manager named Bob Keating, who came from sports but didn't know soccer. But that's fine to get a good general manager. And then Vince Casey, who's he went on to become I think New York Rangers and NHL, and really highly respected guy. No, they had a good front office, in fact, but things would be outsourced to or demanded to be by the corporate people, done from Englewood Cliffs, that really hurt. For instance, what I remember is, and boy, you're jogging my memory, but they would do their advertising for the team from their own advertising department in Englewood Cliffs. And I'll never forget pulling my hair out and going to the general manager. Again, I was 17, but they allowed me to do this, and they would either run ads for a game, the morning of the game or the day after the game, or they'd say buy two boxes of Lipton tea and redeem it for half price ticket for the team end game. But they'd run the ad in the food section or something like that. And I can't tell you it was literally that, but it was stuff that bespoke attenuation and being out of touch. So there were those kinds of things that would give you pause a little bit. But certainly that first year in 1978 was largely a dream year, right? As I say, 30,126 fans for the Cosmos game, 21,000 fans against Detroit Express, with Trevor Francis, Fort Lauderdale Striker. We would get some great crowds that first year. The enthusiasm was spectacular.
It also didn't hurt to have had a very competitive team, very English and Scottish and UK sort of centric and stuff. But I remember the 78th season as a Cosmos fan, just like almost overnight, the T-men were like a dreaded rival. I mean, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the game that they came to Giant Stadium, I think it was on the national feed, that game, the TVS game of the week, and I think Cosmos lost and stuff, or it was a very sort of bitter kind of series, but it happened literally just kind of overnight.
Yeah, no, it was tremendous. Yeah, there was. I mean, that hoped for effect, whether or not the league expanded too quickly. Initially, signs were really good, and that was a magical, just like '74 for the first year of the Minutemen. '78 was a magical year for the team, and I couldn't have been happier. And they, Vince Casey, gave me a part-time job. Still again in high school, but a part-time job in the front office. But amazingly, he made me the game official scorer, which, like, for a 17-year-old to be deciding who gets assists and stuff like that, and being the one filling out the score sheet and awarding assists or deciding that and was more than a dream come true. Plus, they put me on their junior team, which really sounded great. But all it meant was I used to be able to go out to Foxborough once in a while and train with the first team, which was, I was a very happy young man.
That must be amazing. Well, give me a sense of who do you remember from a player and coach perspective that stood out, perhaps personalities, and then also too, I want to maybe separately. I'm really intrigued at sort of this Schaefer Stadium thing, because I don't think people kind of remember, and obviously there's a lot of reasons maybe to forget sometimes what Schaefer Stadium really was and wasn't, right? I'm really curious to hear sort of the, shall we say, fan experience, the location, all that kind of stuff relative to this new shot at NASL glory, so to speak.
Sure. The people who stood out. I mean, obviously the coach, Noel Cantwell, Dennis Violette, who, was his assistant coach, and Dennis Violette, was a Manchester United legend, and had survived the horrible plane crash where most of the Manchester United team, had died in Munich, and so they came in with tremendous reputations, and the players obviously, when I would train with them, I used to be able to dress and shower with them in the locker room, so to be with, Kevin Cat Keelan in particular, stood out. Ringo, again, became a close friend, so I stuck with him as much as possible. The guys were largely cordial to me, but also, when you're not literally one of the team, some of them put you through your paces. That happened to me, later in my actual pro time with the Baltimore Blast, in 1984 and of the MISL. And so, the only one I really got close to was Ringo. And I would say the other players, Paddy Powell, right? Isn't that his name? I believe.
Now you got me.
Yeah, no. So, Kevin Keelan, Mick Flanagan, oh my God, came from Charlton. And those guys were memorable. The English guys, again, were mostly cordial, but sometimes would, do their own thing to make sure you weren't literally part of it. You might get an extra elbow, out there in the field. But I would say mostly Mick Flanagan and Kevin Keelan of the English players, and a guy named Chris Turner stood out.
Well, let me so before we get to the stadium thing, so Flanagan obviously was a quick standout, right, from the earliest get-go. It seems to me like the team, and maybe you don't remember the specifics of this, I certainly don't, but it seemed like it was a very, very short time between the team was sort of announced and, given the sort of the green light to it having to hit the field in, I guess, April of that year. Do I have this right? It was maybe 4 months, perhaps? Something along those lines to get it going? I don't know if you know that or not.
Yeah, no, it was very quickly. And I did see, there's only one article I remember my first paragraph on, and it wasn't one of the ones they posted, but the ones they posted, it's interesting. One of them was about that. Of course, they didn't post the whole thing. I could probably get it from Mike W. at Soccer America, but Mike Wataya. But, it was about, I think that article was about, teammen quickly signed players and all that. And there was the picture of, I think it was Cantwell with, and I just verified it's Paddy Powell, Colin Paddy Powell. And I think that's a picture of them signing. And I think you're right. It happened very quickly, something like 4 months. Yeah, you are right. It came together very quickly.
And how about the stadium? I mean, I think also people quickly forget too. You mentioned Mike Flanagan earlier. He was the NASL's MVP of '78, right? So this, that didn't hurt having that sort of from the get go. How about this stadium? Because I think most people would say it's convenient. It was there. I'm not sure people would sort of call it the most fan friendly, or maybe I'm applying modern day conveniences to the reality of what existed in 1978?
Well, here's how I'd put it. The whole issue of soccer-specific stadium was not, was not a reality then. And so again, I don't think the large capacity of it was at all alienating. I think you're absolutely right that that Schaefer Stadium being, as built for the Patriots, was a minimalist stadium. Yes, there were 60,000 seats, but all but a relatively few, maybe 5,000 in the aggregate, 5,000 or 6,000 were benches and not chairbacks. So yes, it was always a minimalist stadium, and there's the famous story of the first Patriots game there, an exhibition game against the New York Giants, where the traffic jam going down Route 1 to get there. You had people getting there late in the second quarter, and the bathrooms overflowed. So yes, it was a minimalist stadium, but I don't view it as, people have become used to it. I don't view it as a bar from people coming to the games. And again, a better choice than BU because Boston University Stadium, it was on the green line of what we call the T, the public transportation right in Boston. But too small a stadium, and also, just didn't work. So I don't view it as being played at the big stadium as being a problem. Again, the attendance there were fantastic that first year. If we thought the Minutemen, 4 years earlier, averaging 10,000 was good, here we were getting, over 30,000 and 21,000 and 20,000 for games, and another game, I think 24,000. Not every game was like that, obviously, but I don't view the stadium itself as at that time a bar to fans coming if they wanted to see good soccer, and they came certainly for the big games.
For those who are not sort of familiar with the New England area, the Boston area, and stuff, the New England quote unquote moniker, right, is I don't. Here's my sort of ignorance showing, and it shows often, by the way, is sort of the uniqueness, the double-edged sword, I guess, of that sort of regional name and approach, because it's not quite Boston, it's not quite Providence, it's not quite in between, but it is all of those things and none of those things. And having a stadium that's literally, I guess, geographically quite in the middle of that sort of defined region, from a marketing perspective, based on what you remember and now what you've since learned, I mean, does that help or hurt or hinder? Because, the stadium itself is not really close to a true major metropolitan area without a drive, right? And I don't know if that helps or hinders either the T-men in this case, or frankly, subsequently, or maybe in that region it doesn't really matter, or maybe it does. I don't know.
Well, if we're talking about the T-men, we're not talking about the Revolutions.
All right, let's talk about T-men. Let's start there.
Yeah, let's talk about the T-men. I don't really think it hindered it too much. The issues people talk about today, it just weren't the same then. In theory, again, people were willing to go if they were interested. Like Foxborough's, I think 22 miles from where I live in Newton, and not not a bar. In theory, if you drew from Providence, and in theory you would, because it's a good soccer community and an ethnic community. And I say in theory again, because sometimes if the quality of soccer is not good enough, ethnic soccer aficionados will affirmatively reject going to these games, and they'd rather watch piped-in games from their home countries on closed circuit, at their clubhouses, of their social clubs. But in theory, Providence is attractive. In theory, it's closer to New Bedford and Fall River, where there's a big Portuguese community, and that becomes relevant in 1980, and a big mistake that the T-men made when they were back at Foxborough Schaefer Stadium. But I don't want to jump ahead. So I don't think, if we're talking about 1978 first, I don't think it was a bar.
Yeah, interesting. Well, describe for me sort of what sort of happens after 78, because it was a magical start for sure. But Mike Flanagan doesn't come back, and that's just the least of the worries, I think, or certainly one of them.
Right. Yeah, Mike Flanagan, or Mick Flanagan, as he was called, he came from Charlton at the time. Charlton was in the second division, but he, I think, led the league in scoring, like you said, and was MVP and became a local folk hero here. And he didn't come back, but really, you've got it right again. That was the least of the problems. The big problem was, and while I'm an attorney, I'm not a real estate attorney, but what I can tell you is that part of Schaefer Stadium, Foxborough Stadium, was built evidently on a tiny part on land owned by a harness race horse track. And a person bought that horse race track, a guy named Eddie Andelman, who was a big, he's a businessman, but he was a big sports and actually kind of ahead of his time sports talk show host here in Boston. He had a show called The Sports Huddle, but he was a pretty hard driving businessman, and he told Lipton Tea that he wouldn't let the team men play in Schaefer Stadium in 1979 unless they paid him presumably for what's called an easement, a right to use another's property or access through that property. And Lipton Tea felt that the price he was asking was exorbitant and blackmailish, and they said no. And so because they, by that dispute, were kind of barred from using the whole stadium, they found another venue for 1979, and lo and behold, it was Boston University's Nickerson Field. And that actually, so there you go. They're in the desirable, Boston metropolitan area, Boston area, on the green line of the T that goes right by BU. And yet going to that stadium hurt tremendously. And the team lost a lot of that momentum. 1979 was a reversal of fortune for the team men. By the way, part of it having to do with that, part of it having to do with not getting back a lot of their star players from 78, but also part of it having to do with, in my opinion, one of the seminal developments in the league that ultimately killed the NASL, and that is the ill-advised calling of a player strike at the beginning of the 1979 season, from which momentum was lost. So, yeah, 79 wasn't a great year for the team men in Boston area, or, largely for the NASL as compared to 78.
What was the, do you remember the situation with Flanagan? I mean, this is a guy who, lit up the league and was like, on his way, arguably for even something even greater in 79. But was it Charlton Athletic that was not letting him come back? I know a lot of the players that were coming from England were doing the 3-month in the NASL thing. I'm just wondering perhaps if that was the issue, or the team men couldn't pay or whatever. I'm just, curious if you might know why.
Yeah, I actually don't remember per se whether he wanted more money or the team was asking more for the loan. I believe that happened more dramatically even in Detroit with the Express with Trevor Francis, because he was it and even a bigger player. And I believe that had to do with economics. But I can't tell you. I remember. Okay, I just Googled it. I'm being honest. I couldn't remember. It says Flanagan got into a contract dispute back home with Charlton and ultimately with the team men themselves. So, and I guess it looks like they prematurely announced his return, but my aging brain doesn't literally remember what happened. But that was a major disappointment.
Well, it's got to be a huge shock.
Yeah, but I think moving the stadium, not getting people back, ironically lowering the capacity, and the NASL strike all conspired, and the team not doing as well on the field all conspired to hurt.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just plain out forget that the NASL, especially in its sort of explosive late 70s years, so dependent on this is before it even was called the Premier League, but sort of this influx of English talent that would literally be, only for about 3 months. The NASL season itself was relatively truncated. I mean, maybe it was April to August, and soccer bowls were happening in August, right? Late August. I think largely because that was just the more convenient thing, and then it sort of elongated over time. Give me a sense of Lipton. You kind of hinted at it before, right? But based on your memory and what you've learned sort of since in your rearview mirror, why do you think a company like Lipton Tea would be interested in buying, owning, and then obviously promoting and activating a relationship with a soccer team? I mean, Warner Communications and the Cosmos as template, okay. We see Madison Square Garden at the time or Gulf and Western, I guess, then owner of MSG, with the Washington Diplomats. And we see a few others out there, too, as part of this massive expansion thing. But how the hell does that happen? And then, by the way, the naming of the team, too, is it's legendary. I think most people kind of got taken aback by, like, T-Men. It doesn't seem logical on paper, but then again, nothing seemed logical about this league when you think about it.
No, I think that's right. I mean, one of the seminal things, and Phil Woosnam said, and of course history. I always say that pro soccer in this country is run by the Santayana rule, that those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. And Woosnam, I'll never forget in '78 when they expanded. And he said, just a short time ago, you could buy an NASL franchise for $25,000, and now it's increased 40 times, because it costs $1 million to buy a franchise, and that's what cost in 1978. Well, of course, when I say those who forget the past, by 1983, you could have an NASL franchise for nothing, as long as you were willing to, run it in the market and take over the P&L. And so, but why did they do it? I think they saw Warner, the success, and they thought it would expand their brand. Soccer, again, looked to be the coming thing. It was a low barrier to entry, and ultimately they thought maybe an asset that would appreciate a lot. It was an experiment, but I don't really fully know the motivation. I just remember, being happy that it was going to be a well-financed team. But as I said, there were certainly opportunity costs from, some of the endeavors and operations of the club, being run, quote, more efficiently out of New Jersey, because it was out of touch with the fandom and how to reach the fandom.
Well, nobody will argue that it was probably one of the best logos in all of the history of the North American Soccer League. The uniforms, I thought, were especially great. That especially, I think, in the first year, maybe it was for others as well, there was literally this sort of red letter T that sort of comprised the uniform, which was sort of subtle but also notable. I remember vividly from it, and I'm just short of being a uniform and logo nerd. And there are other podcasts and blogs devoted to that, but it is probably in the top tier, if not in the top 5 of all time NASL logos and uniforms and stuff. Can you remember sort of your understanding of perhaps what I would call the beginning of the end of this franchise? Like, when did you know? Can you remember or recall sort of the denouement of this and the ultimate abandonment for Jacksonville, of all places? And we can sort of maybe wrap up with that. But when did you know, and when did they know, and what transpired? Because 79 obviously was a huge come down from 78, and 80 was kind of probably make or break at that point, right?
Sure. I'm happy to do that. Just 2 quick things. One important player I forgot is Keith Weller, who was on the team.
Sure, I remember him from some of the ads too. Some of the print ads for tea. Yeah,
correct. And he was I think from Leicester City, and he was huge. And I forgive me for getting him. He's right up there, 1, 2, or 3. And also, by the way, even though the name it had plausible double entendre. It wasn't just Lipton Tea; it's the Boston Tea Party too, right? So it made kind of sense. So what I'll say is I have distinct personal memories of that, and I'll tell you very quickly. So, I started college and at Cornell, and after the first season in 1978, and then came the spring of my sophomore year, and they still wanted me, right? And said, you got to come home to keep this official scorer job, and I wasn't going to give that up. So I used to have to take a Greyhound bus home, from Ithaca every weekend in the spring for the games, and it was kind of a grueling trip. It was a 12-hour trip because it would stop in Syracuse for 3 hours, and then Scranton or Wilkes-Barre. And so then the GM, Bob Keating, came to me and he said, we want you here. We want to do more with you, but we can't just have you coming home, weekends. If you want to stay with us, you got to transfer back here. And so I actually transferred colleges back home to Boston to be with them. I transferred here to Brandeis, and my sophomore year. So I was a college player at Cornell. I had big disruption on me because I transferred. I had a choice of Brown or Brandeis. I picked Brandeis because I was told I wouldn't have to redshirt, and I still had to redshirt. So it turned out to the ECAC told me late, and so it was a big disruption to me, but it was worth it to be with the team. And then the 79 year, when I did it, it was a disaster. Well, I'm sorry, I should say I transferred at the end of 78. So I had been coming home in the 79 NASL season. I transferred for the fall of 79. And so in 80, after I had, been fully back, the team men came back to Foxborough Schaefer Stadium, but a lot of the magic was lost and a lot of the players were lost. And then there was a miscalculation. And I told you before about New Bedford and Fall River, where the kind of makeup of the team was changed. And they brought in 2 players from Sporting, Keita and Artur, you probably remember, thinking that the Portuguese community would come out in huge numbers. But again, if I had been consulted, I would have been able to tell them that Fall River and New Bedford were Benfica and Porto towns more than they are Sporting.
Interesting.
So,
so you can't just sort of blanket say Portuguese. You had to get to the elemental levels of their specific fandom.
Correct. And plus, that's not an automatic either. I mean, look at Chivas USA. You just because you bring players into the club you like, it has to be the right players and or again, the quality of play has to be good enough, or almost there's pride in saying I wouldn't be caught dead there. It's not good enough soccer. So other than I believe a 28,000 fan game against the Cosmos, if I remember correctly, in 1980. 1980 was nothing like 1978. The magic was not recreated. But I remember Vince Casey valiantly, honestly, in the press box, announcing a game, I believe it was a game against San Jose Earthquakes in a big rainstorm, that we had barely 1,000 fans game, and he announced it, fans at the game, and it was completely depressing, but he was valiant, and he announced it honestly and said, hey, I'm going to announce the good with the bad. And the magic wasn't there anymore. And I had transferred colleges, and, that's when the NASL started to experiment with indoor. And we played in 80 winter in the Providence Civic Center. And in a completely excruciating moment, I was in the press box at an indoor game wherein it was announced that the team men officially announced that the team men were moving to Jacksonville. And I was completely crushed because, again, it wasn't Boston. It was larger outside events it wasn't Boston's ability to support the team. And the GM wanted me to, move with them to Jacksonville, but I wasn't going to transfer to the University of Jacksonville. And, I'd already moved once, and, my college soccer career mattered and my degree mattered. So that was one of the saddest days, in my life, and crushed, second time, two franchises, failing essentially, at least in my hometown. And then they went to Jacksonville, and I believe Dennis Violet, and Ringo moved to Jacksonville, where I believe he still is. And, and they, I think, had, one initial welcoming year there, but ultimately, the thing failed, and the league failed. And it was sad. And I obviously became attenuated to the team, other than if, that player who, Ringo, who I was close with and would keep up with. And ironically, what is the year actually when they folded? Do you know? Was it before the league folded?
The Jacksonville franchise?
Yeah.
I believe it was 84, and I think then they so they the last year they were in the NASL was outdoor in 82, and then they went down to the ASL for 83 and what then became the USL in 84.
Okay, so but I guess I meant when did they leave the NASL? Because the reason I say that is, ironically, after college, I joined the Baltimore Blast of the MISL, and Ringo, who I was still close friends with, he joined Team America in D.C., which Team America was the experiment to put a national team in one city after the Washington Dips.
Whole nother episode to come. You betcha.
Exactly. So I was with the Blast from 82 to 84, and Ringo would come to see me, and I would go to see him, in D.C. So he was gone from the team, and I just didn't remember whether Jacksonville was an NASL team there anymore. But so the answer is no. And this was 83, where he was with Panagoulios, I think, who was the coach then. So yeah. So again, I kind of lost touch, because it was about making teams successful, and and obviously my hometown successful, and but that was ultimately a sad chapter with some great successes and memories.
So that indoor season of 1980-81, which was sort of the NASL's second sort of official, real, full season, that obviously the MISL in 78-79 had kind of kick-started the whole idea of it being a legit sport and a possible business-friendly venture. I think it's lost on people, because I think most people look at the Jacksonville version of this team and team as officially beginning with that indoor season before they were ever outdoors in Jacksonville. But you're saying that there was at least one game that that was in New England before the team moved to Jacksonville, or
absolutely. If I recall, listen, I was at that point 19 years old, and I'm not ashamed to say I was sobbing, in my official score seat at the press box. And I believe that game was against the Atlanta Chiefs. But you raise a good question. Did they leave mid indoor season? Hold on. I'm gonna look right now.
I've looked. I'm not so sure. I know that the stats. And look, for whatever reasons, this kind of stuff's important to people like us. For whatever reasons, and it's arguably odd, but it's interesting because you can imagine what that season must have been like if that were the case. How does that work, right? You play a game or two in Providence, and then all of a sudden you're hustling over to Jacksonville because you're literally mid-season, and then you got to finish it out. I think most people kind of just sort of look at the stats and go, oh, they started indoors in Jacksonville, and then they took to the field. Regardless of all that, I'm just surprised, and I think a lot of people are, especially in hindsight, that they kept the team end name of all things. I mean, you made the case for New England and the Boston Tea Party, right? But Jacksonville, it's to me, it's right up there in the pantheon of, like Utah Jazz, right? Like it's just like, and that just has succeeded despite itself. But Interesting, curious, interesting, and yet another sort of wacky turn, I guess, in this crazy league known as the NASL.
Yeah. So what I can tell you for certain that they played at least one game. It was against the Atlanta Chiefs, at least one, and I believe that's where the announcement happened. So what Wikipedia says is they no, where is it? I'm sorry. It said, oh, here it is. They also played one season of indoor soccer using the Providence Civic Center for home games. But then it also says right at the start of the 80-81 indoor season, they relocated to Jacksonville. So that absolutely does confirm what you're saying, which is they relocated mid-season. But I can guarantee you they played at least one game there and it was announced, and I was inconsolable because I certainly didn't know that it was in the works that they were going to move to Jacksonville.
All right. So aside from that abandonment then, and obviously you went to Baltimore for a while, and that was great. So but maybe just sort of wrap this up, and it's hardly sort of fair here, but it's clear that the sport of soccer really kind of never left you, right? But despite your, the ending of your playing days and stuff, you continued to sort of have a bond with this sport, literally all the way up to a few years ago, running for a presidency of U.S. soccer, right? So you give our audience a bit of a sense of what you sort of evolved to professionally in your life and how soccer has stayed kind of on your radar or part of your life since. Because I could imagine that this kind of abandonment might swear you off of the game at this point, right? Being so emotionally tender at that age and sort of being abruptly sort of left behind.
Sure. Do you want to quickly hear about why I stayed in the game or just
please.
Now? Okay, sure. So now realize, I mean, this is, my dad, who's looking down these days, and I have to tell you that a proud moment yesterday because my two boys that are college soccer players now together, they've never played together in their lives at any level. My younger son, who's coming back from a devastating knee injury, played his first college game yesterday and assisted on one of my older son's goals. So, and what I posted about it, because we had film of it, was, it's all started by my dad, who came from Germany, Werner Gans, who started it all. So even though I was heartbroken, the bond, my love for the sport and the bond with my dad was, of course, not abrogated in any way. So I became even more militant, more devoted to the sport and more militant about the NASL running their being, having more of a centralized focus on teams that are going bad in markets that are good markets. So I felt even more that I had fixed it. I had transferred from Cornell to Brandeis precisely for a team that left. So I had more of a thought that it had to work. I unexpectedly had to redshirt, after I transferred, and then broke my leg playing semi-pro, and then had a series of injuries that made my college career virtually nil. So I secretly, held a desire to prosecute my playing career and make it back from these injuries. I very overtly said, it's not the sport, it's not the city, clubs just have to be run correctly. And so what happened is, I knew I was ultimately, or thought I was ultimately headed to law school, but after I graduated, I decided that I wanted to secretly make it back, try to make it back, shouldn't say make it back, but try to make it back as a player. But more significantly or more likely, try to use my experience and competency and understanding the game to help make an American team, not in a long-term way, successful in this country. And I was fortunate enough, after a long process, that you don't want to hear the whole story, but ultimately, we didn't have a team in Boston, and the closest two teams, and this is 1982. To where I lived in Boston were the Cosmos, still in the NASL, and the Baltimore Blast in the MISL. And I got front office offers from both of them. Tom Werblin made me an offer, Sonny Werblin's son from the Cosmos, and the GM of the Blast, a guy named Mitch Burke, made me offers. And because of my secret desire to make it back as a player, I knew I would never be good enough to be a New York Cosmo because I started so late. Also as a player, I was a much better indoor player than I was an outdoor player because indoor soccer, mastering the brain part of it and the tactics, indoor soccer is much closer to hockey and basketball. You have to worry about 4 field teammates at a time. Not your goalkeeper, as opposed to 9 when you're outdoors. So I was a much better indoor player. So I chose the Blast over the Cosmos because I was going to try to make it back, and that was a dream realized. Never want to overstate it, but I ultimately made it back from all these injuries to be signed, and a Blast player for 6 months before I was, cut at the next training camp after there was an ownership change. So that was a dream that really only mattered to my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and my parents at the time. But again, was a mountain climbed. And then, what was a significant, ultimately, person in the front office under the GM. And, we became one of the more successful American pro soccer teams in this country. And to this day, have set some attendance records. In 1984, the year we won the championship and became, for at least an ephemeral time, more popular than the Baltimore Orioles the year after they won the World Series. We had a parade at Inner Harbor after we won the championship, but that year we played to 97% capacity, but in 31 home games. That's not a record anymore, obviously, but we had 24 sellouts, which I think to this day for an American professional soccer franchise or team still is a record. So that was an incredibly satisfying, contribution. The Blast were the top team during my last year, and one of the top teams from 82 to 84 when I was with them. The owner, who liked me a lot, and so he was a character, a guy named Bernie Roden. He sold the team in my last year. The new owner saw that I was the last guy in the team and one of the top guys in the front office, so he said, I want him cut. So I got cut in the first week of training camp. But the significant point was that Bernie Roden sold this high salaried payroll team relative to that time for a profit. So we are one of the Baltimore Blast of the MISL era, circa, even before me, circa 1980, 84, 85, and I was lucky enough to be there, for 82 to 84, were true success story, in my opinion. I think things started to change for the MISL once we got awarded the World Cup in 88, and, we had USA Cable Network and CBS contracts, but I think at a certain point after the World Cup was awarded, people said we got to get back to the real game, outdoor soccer. And, again, mismanagement as well in MISL. And ultimately that league, I think in 92, closed up shop. But anyway, so that was it. And I had full of my pro soccer experience. And I thought that was it. I'd be done. And I went to law school at that point. And after law school, joined one of the large Boston law firms, and just thought I was going to be an associate, and I would have no other soccer contact anymore, or professional experience with that. But lo and behold, at the end of my first year, senior partner in the firm came to me and said, "Hey, we know your background. One of our two of our clients, because they owned it together. One was Bob Kraft, one was a guy named Steve Karp. They owned Foxborough Stadium together, then called Foxborough Stadium. They want the World Cup, in particular Bob Kraft. And Boston's bid effort is 29th and last. The quality of its bid effort is 29th and last of all the cities bidding for what was then thought to be 12 bid sites. And, they're close to pulling the plug. Really, it was Bob Kraft more who was interested. Do you think you can turn it around? And, I'm like, I hope so. And, later that afternoon, I was in Bob Kraft's office and so this is, I guess, 1990. And the firm turned me loose for the next 3 years. Like 50% of my time was working on turning around the Boston World Cup bid effort. So here I was back in soccer. And, I worked with a lot of people, and we worked all together. And, the city was never ranked last, but the quality of the bid effort was. And ultimately, 29 cities bid for what were not 12 World Cup sites, but 9 ultimately. And I'm pleased to say in 1993, obviously, we had turned it around enough so that we were chosen as a World Cup site. And so from there, it just continued. I don't want to overstate it, but, Bob Kraft, when he was considering an MLS investment, asked me my opinion. The first GM of the Revolution was Brian O'Donovan, who was my old client, as he was a senior executive at Foxborough Stadium. So I advised them in their first year, not about not on the field, but about, I kind of helped them with the blast model of front office, which I think was unique, and in terms of fan and corporate sponsorships and all that. As you probably know, even though they had one of the worst teams on the field, for the first 3 years, they were the number 2 team attendance-wise in the league, which, by the way, proves again Boston's a great soccer town, because even though the team wasn't doing well, they had huge crowds at Foxborough Stadium. So I did a little with the Reds, and then advisors asked me if I'd, in other words, friend advisors who were not lawyers, asked me if I would help out their players. And first time I saw my name in Soccer America as an agent, after just having done the World Cup, which I was most proud of, I didn't want to be known as an agent. So I said, I'm not going to be an agent. I'll help out, as a quote lawyer, your friend, your young friends. And so the first 2 players I represented were Mike Burns, who was on the national team, and then someone who was the Reds' first-round pick from Boston College, a guy named Paul Keegan. So I did that, but I personally didn't want to represent many players, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And so I've stayed in the game. My best friend from my time at the Blast and I started a consultancy in the mid 2000s to the Premiership. We met with Richard Scudamore, and so we've done a lot, over there, and whether it's I was a player, I was in management, whether as a lawyer representing players or management, I've kind of done it all in the sport since then. And then, and I continue to this day, probably, good 50% of my practice is soccer related, whether it's representing teams, players, clubs, players on the pro end, or even doing stuff in this crazy industry, which is youth soccer, which is a big business and a flawed business, and trying to always be a voice of reason. It's a good 50% of my practice. And the last thing I'll talk about is I've been working on stuff today in that sphere. And the last thing, just about running for U.S. Soccer. Yeah, I mean, I've been asked for a good many years to challenge Sunil Gulati at the time, and Sunil was someone I knew since 1990 because he was with the World Cup organizing committee in 1990, and there just wasn't a good government aspect to the fact that Sunil was about to run for his 4th unopposed 4-year term for the 2018 election, and I had said no earlier, but after the Klinsmann debacle, people came around again, and my partners said you can do it, and so I did it, and I was the only challenger to Sunil until that fateful night in October when the U.S. got knocked out by in Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, out of three of the 4 voting constituencies, by our measures, my campaign team's measures, we were winning and on our way to winning that election. But after the U.S. got knocked out, as 7 other candidates got the temerity to run, and they all saw that Sunil was in fact vulnerable. And after that, it became a almost circus the last 4 months of the election, because it was crazy with 8 different candidates. But from that, my involvement has become even greater. So in the sport, so I think it's been good. I achieved what I wanted, which was change. At the time, it didn't have to be that I ultimately won it. I wanted to. I always try to affect positive change in the sport, and my involvement since the 2018 election has only increased, and hopefully positively.
So here's the last question, and I think you're probably uniquely qualified to opine on this. So, given what we've, as we record this week with the quick demise of the very short-lived Super League, and what's happened sort of with money and the sport. I mean, money and sports generally, right? But money in particular in the sport, and MLS, frankly, right? It's very interesting to sort of hear all of these issues sort of coming to the forefront, like all at one sort of explosive time, because for every person that says, hey, 25 years, MLS, lots of investment, long-term investors, soccer-specific stadiums, there's an equal, if not sometimes more vociferous number of people on the other side going, where's promotion and relegation? It's watered down. It's never going to be competitive. It's too corporately central. I guess the question in there is, what do you think the future of the pro game specifically is here in this country? And then is it even juxtaposable to or is it part of the dynamic that probably doesn't go away over time, as we see in this Super League, this, money and separation and corporatization, frankly, of the sport that you and I both sort of grew up loving, perhaps in a purer form, maybe in a naive, youthful way, or maybe actually. What are your thoughts about the future of the pro game here in this country relative to all of that?
Boy, it's the last question, so I want to be concise. But if you're asking me to address pro-rel, which became a big issue on the campaign, then that's a whole other show.
Yeah, I think that's just.
I don't think you want. I don't think it's
show, but it's an element. Right? It's an element. No, it's not a sideshow. I think it's an element of the bigger issue. We don't have to get too specific.
Yeah, no, we don't have to get too it. I mean, I think pro-rel is. Let's say quickly, it's absolutely correct that players who have to play to stay up are hungrier. That said, as we all know, clubs, precisely because the revolt of the fans this week, it bespeaks that clubs are ingrained. They came out of the communities 120 years ago. Every community has a club, and so if a club gets relegated, if Charlton gets relegated, at the Valley, you don't get 27,000 fans anymore. Maybe if you're in the championship, when they got relegated, but you'll still get 23,000 the next year. If the Boston Celtics or Pittsburgh Pirates were relegated, they wouldn't get 32,000 for the Pirates, or the Celtics wouldn't sell out the Garden. The point is the structure is different. Sports here were built on owners buying and investing in teams, and fans allegiance is different. The issue of the Super League. I think it's a mistake to say it's analogous to what happens in America. It's not that they were creating a closed league or competition. It's that they were doing something further. It was, if you analogize it, it was like to say that there's the American League East in baseball, and there's the Yankees and the Red Sox and the Rays and the Blue Jays, and you'll play a whole season. But by the way, the Yankees and the Red Sox will make the playoffs every year. That was even a step further, So we can talk forever about pro-rel. Pro-rel in this country has a spot, in the lower leagues, and maybe ultimately in the top league. But it is glib to just say it automatically should be. For one to say automatically, it should append to MLS. It ignores the structure and history necessarily of pro teams in this country. So I don't think it's completely analogous. I think it is important. I actually went on the BBC on Friday and made this point. It is important to say what was even further than how things are structured here about the Super League that was so rejected by the fandom there. The future of soccer in this country, I think MLS's challenge is in a lot of ways that the world is flat, and that you can get the best game piped in here. Unlike, the NASL, which was, the competition was high, it was good enough. And you could get Soccer Made in Germany tape, the condensed version, and Toby Charles and Mario Machado, but they weren't live games. Here, it's a flat world. So MLS has challenges in that regard. In terms of TV and TV money and all that kind of stuff. To me, what MLS needs to do is to get the quality to be what I would call good enough. Americans want high quality the most, and I do think that MLS will grow and grow in terms of fan allegiance if it can get to a sustainable quality. I also think that MLS's challenge is more TV money, like all leagues, and in order to do that, it's got to in my opinion, improve the quality. The fact that lately the emergence of the American player has really started to hit some semblance of critical mass does fit the current model of MLS, becoming a sellers league. And as Rory Smith of New York Times would say, a league has to understand where it is, or a club has to understand where it is. Leipzig is not going to be where everyone wants to wind up for the rest of their life, but it's a major post along the way. Ajax, a club I love and represent and am devoted to, Celtic, that kind of thing. And MLS, I think is going to view itself that way in the development of American players. And, that is contingent on American fans understanding that is a process that fans have to accept, because, here in Boston, we're still sore about, Babe Ruth being sold to the New York Yankees. The idea of transfers, which are really sales, being part of American sport is something that a lot of American fans need to still get used to.
Okie dokie. Mighty thanks to Steve for a wonderful trip down memory lane. Lots of great nuggets of stuff in there. You can follow Steve Gans on Twitter at Steve Gans 2018, at Steve Gans, Gans 2018. As we mentioned before, Steve is a partner in the law firm of Prince Lobel and, or is it Prince Lobel? I think it's probably Prince Lobel is my guess. I'm sorry, I should have asked that, but I'm sure he's screaming into his device now as to how to properly pronounce that. But if you're in need of his corporate legal expertise, I'm sure you can backtrack it from the Twitter feed and find his contact information there. And while you're online and doing those searches and follows and stuff, why not do the same for us? We're at goodseatsstillavailable.com. That little website will be sort of your amalgamation of all of our previous episodes, and we post them on there too in case you want to stream them from that site. If you want to share them with your friends or download them right from the site, you can do that. We've got great imagery for most of our episodes, and of course, it's the place when we have a guest that has a piece of media to sell, like a book, for example, or a documentary film that you can easily click and purchase said form of media. While you're there, you'll see our various social media labels as well. You can follow us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. You can follow us on Twitter at Good Seats Still. You can also follow us on Facebook. There's a little page devoted to us there too. Our weekly email newsletter. Yeah, you can subscribe to that from the website. Just search up, I'm not sure exactly what tab it's on, but you'll find it. Just your name and your email address. That's all you need, and you'll get our little update either hours or a day or so before we drop our episode. You'll be the first to know on your block as to when and what that's going to be for the coming week. Our email address is hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just send us a piece of email that way. You can do that too. Why not? Why don't you? We appreciate that. And of course, the best way to show your support for the show is to subscribe in your podcast feed or catcher or whatever device you use to listen to podcasts. And while you're doing that, hey, why not a 5-star rating? Why don't you? Wherever you can rate and review, we appreciate that. That helps other people like you find the show and be recommended to listen to it and hopefully spread the love that way. We appreciate that for sure. We want to thank, of course, our good pal, Dr. Jerry Payne, who painstakingly puts all of our collective pieces together. Thank you, kind sir, as always. And, geez, who knows what's on tap for next week? I don't even know, but I'm sure it'll be good. At least I hope it'll be good. Until then, we'll look for you here, this very same place, same location, and we appreciate your support of the show. Until then, please be safe. Get your shots if you haven't done that already. And thanks so much again for listening. Take care.